gentleman. I don't know how many people he's helped over the years. And he's one of those people that I really admire. He made his avocation his vocation, so to speak. And without anything else, Wayne, come on up and do your
I'm way more than I'm an alcoholic.
Amen.
You know, I want to try to tell the truth. Okay? I realize that causes some humor over here at the peanut gallery, but I have a means and ways of confabulating things from time to time, so I'll try to keep that to a minimum. And John, if I knew you were going to wear your tie, I would have worn a tie, but I didn't want to be too high class, you know. Good night for penguins, isn't it? Yeah. I got my grapevine in the mail this afternoon when I got home. And most of you know that I usually work double shifts on Saturday and Sunday, and to get my 40 hours in. And so I left at 4 o'clock today and got my Grapevine out. If you are not a subscriber to the Grapevine, I would certainly recommend you think about it, because it's an awful good magazine. I always try to ration myself that this is like alcohol. You know, I always just try to drink 1 or 2 drinks, and I keep, every time it comes, I said, well, you know, I'm only going to read 1 or 2 of the articles. And basically, I've read most of it. There's a couple left that I haven't gotten to yet, but it's reading the Grapevine is it's just like alcoholism with me, I guess. This room was the first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous I ever went to. I was talking to AJ before the meeting about it and how it used to be here. Used to be the smoke would come down to about this high off the floor, and you couldn't see across the room. And AJ and I were lucky enough we got here when some of the men that started this group were still alive, and they'd usually sit back there by the bulletin board and keep track of the rest of us, I guess. And we were just reminiscing about all the people. Unfortunately, we're getting old, and or at least AJ is. And most of those folks are gone. My sobriety date is April 13th, 1981. And AJ reminded me of how I used to always say, you know, I was a Stony Brook baby. That was my last big drunk. And my first meeting in this building was April 14th, 1981. And I really didn't, I had to go back and try to figure that out, because I didn't know you were supposed to keep track of those kind of things when I got here. And in fact, I think I may have had a slight advantage when I came here, because you know, the idea that I would stop drinking was just such an alien concept to me that I didn't even entertain it. I came here because I was too sick to keep drinking. And I figured I would come here and something would happen and somehow I'd stay sober a little while so I could heal up and then resume my career, which I just considered it to be inevitable that I would do so. I don't remember them offering chips that first meeting. I picked up my white chip at the hospital group on Friday night, back when it met in the old hospital cafeteria, which of course has been torn down now and replaced by that new heart center. And I remember when I picked up that chip, I felt, you know, I just felt like I was joining the Lafayette Escadrille or something. It was just a really strong experience when I went up to the head of the room and picked up that chip. I'm probably going to be a little disjointed here because, you know, Kirk reminded me of something he wanted me to mention and a couple other things that people have said. Well, make sure you tell them about X, Y, or Z. So I don't have a set AA talk. I don't do this often enough. I think this is actually only like the fourth time in the past 5 years that I've done this. So I'm really not organized or smooth with it. So I'm just going to do the best I can and talk about the things that pop into my head as they come up. And like I said, if it's a little disjointed, I hope you get something out of it. You know, having my narcissistic, self-centered personality, of course, I've been thinking about this for days because I have to give the perfect AA talk, you know, which of course I'm not going to be able to do. But I've been thinking about it for some time, and you know, I'm not really sure. When I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of exposure to alcohol. The only time alcohol was in my parents' home was, you know, generally special occasions, Christmas, Thanksgiving, that sort of thing. My father was in the Army. He was in the Corps of Engineers. And I remember the first time I ever tasted alcohol, we were stationed at Fort Belvoir. My father was a major then, I guess. He was a guy that came up in the old Army. He had a dirt farm out here in Roseland, and the Depression hit the farmers before it ever hit the rest of the country. And he lost his farm in 1928. He went bankrupt, so he joined the Army. And he spent 13 years as an enlisted man, and then World War II came along, and although he had had a heart attack and had some physical problems and things like that, he got commissioned as a first lieutenant in February 1942. He never went overseas in World War II because he spent the whole war training engineer troops at Fort Belvoir. And so I was born in 1946. I was born in Denver. My father at that time was in Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, and my mother was traveling across country to join him, and I popped out in Denver. So, and then you had to be 4 months old before you could get on the ship and go to Hawaii. So she had to wait until I was 4 months old before we could sail to Hawaii. And of course, I don't remember a lot about that. You know, they've got pictures of me, this little fat Buddha-looking baby sitting on the beach grinning, you know. And I was a cute little booger, I'll tell you that. And you know, all the palm trees and everything like that. And, of course, you know, I don't remember that. First memories I have is, you know, the Korean War came along, and my father was at the time stationed in Japan, and before we had joined him there, and of course, the troops in Japan were the ones that were sent to Korea right away. So he was one of the first American soldiers into Korea. And my older siblings who remember my father, you know, I'm kind of me and one younger brother were like 8-10 years younger than our older siblings. My older siblings tell me that, you know, my father changed a great deal, and I think in retrospect, you know, he probably came back from Korea with a real bad case of PTSD. You know, he never talked about it very much until, you know, he got old and senile and demented, and I talked to him about it a few times, and some of the stuff he told me was just terrible. And so, based on what my older siblings tell me, I think whatever happened to him in Korea changed him into a completely different person. And from that point on, he was fairly distant. I don't remember ever being close with him like my older siblings say they were. He was a shut off and shut down. And so, But I do remember the first alcohol I ever tasted was he sent me to the refrigerator. I must have been 8 or 9 years old to get a beer. We were stationed at Fort Belvoir at the time, and I remember sipping that beer. It's just like if it happened yesterday. I remember exactly what it tasted. You know, it was a Budweiser. I could taste it to this day. That is almost 60 years ago. And I remember how much I liked the taste of it. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to drink when I was a kid. First time I ever got drunk, I was 12. It was at my sister's wedding. And, I managed to, people set down a champagne glass. It was, I got enough to actually feel the effects of alcohol, and I really liked it. I think that, I was a kid that clearly had a lot of problems, and alcohol was a cure for my problem. I live in a house that I inherited from my parents when they died, and my mother kept all my report cards. And I ran across them the other night, and I was going through them. She did a big manila envelope, I started school in Japan. I was at the Tokyo American School, and, I flunked first grade. And, the teachers, all my report cards were the same, Wayne would do much better if he'd only apply himself. I don't know if any of you ever got that. I never applied myself. Like I said, I had to go to summer school to pass first grade, and if you were teaching me something I didn't care about, I paid absolutely no attention to it. It had to be something that I liked for me to pay any attention to it, and I did not take directions very well. I tell people, and this is the truth, I got kicked out of the Cub Scouts, I got kicked out of the Boy Scouts, I got kicked out of the MYF. If you tried to make me behave, you were just out of luck, I can't spend all this time I've got here on my childhood, but I'll give you one example of how disconnected we were. When my father retired from the Army, I was in the 4th grade. We moved back here. And I remember when I was in the 8th grade, all the kids that I went to school with had grown up, and I was the kid coming in from outside, And I didn't have a southern accent, I'd lived in Hawaii and Japan and all over, and, I didn't fit in any way, shape, or form. But this sticks with me today. When I was in the 8th grade, I remember one of my classmates was killed in an accident. And he was a boy that was an Eagle Scout. He was the president of the class. He was well liked by everybody. As far as I could tell, he had absolutely no faults. He was the kind of kid that, would have been a success at anything he did. And he was killed in an accident. And I remember coming into class and that day, and the principal came in and told us that he had been killed. And all the girls in the class, frankly, just went berserk. I mean, they were screaming and hollering and carrying on and gnashing their teeth and everything like that. And of course, me in my little self-centered world, rather than to feel bad about this very nice person tragically dying young, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the thought came to me, if it was me that was dead, they wouldn't be carrying on like this. And that is just, a prime example of the self-centeredness that I think has been a burden that I have carried and contributed a great deal to my alcoholism. So, I was in the 8th grade, so I was 13 years old then, so I'm 66 now, so that's over 50 years ago. Over 50 years ago now. So I that's one thing I don't forget. My response was, they wouldn't be acting like this if it was me that was killed. And that's not a well response. So I went on, graduated from high school. Like I said, my father was disabled, completely disabled from the military, so I had a VA scholarship, and I could go to any school I wanted to. And I'd gone up to Chapel Hill with my grandfather to sell watermelons and cantaloupes off the back of his truck. He was a farmer, had a little farm out here, and I really liked it. And I didn't apply to any other school. The only school I applied to was UNC. And I got in, and I didn't want to work on the farm that summer. So, I was my grandfather's worst farmhand, to be honest with you. Everybody else, I was just, I was not cut out to be a farmer. And I remember, trying to help him in the tobacco fields. And, he would always put me wherever, I could do the least damage. He had, in those days, he farmed with a mule. And he would put me guiding the mule, but the mule knew where to go. I don't think the mule ever paid any attention. He'd go down the road, and they'd crop the tobacco and put it in the sled, and the mule would turn around. I would be standing in the sled, but the mule didn't know me. The mule had been doing this for 20 years, for God's sake. Anyway, I couldn't get in trouble. I was a lousy farmhand. Anyway, I didn't want to crop tobacco or do anything like that summer. So 5 days after I graduated from high school, class of '64, old Aberdeen High, I enrolled at Chapel Hill. And the dorm I was put in, all the guys in my suite were football players that were trying to get their grades up in summer school so they could play football. And their grades needed bringing up because of certain characterological and behavioral problems they had, So every night, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I'm not even legally old enough to drink. Every night they would take me out with them downtown Franklin Street to the bars, and I'd sort of be in the middle of all these football players. And I'm like 135 pounds maybe, People asked me what sport I played in high school, and I said, well, I was a drawback. Anyway, I'd go out with these guys, and we'd drink, and, we'd be in the back of the bar, and they'd bring the beer, and, nobody, that's when my drinking really took off. I was able to drink as much as I wanted to, as, I had no problems with access to alcohol, and, fall came, and, I did everything, the things that all freshmen in college do, which is, well, not all, I'm sure, but most of them drink too much and go to the football games and go to the sororities and the fraternities and party. Of course, that had a real bad effect on my grades, so essentially, well, I tell people that I had a D+ average. I think when the next summer rolled around, my quality point average was 1.02. So in my mind, that's D+. Anyway, I wasn't going to be coming back to school, so I got a job as a waiter in a little Jewish delicatessen in town, and which allowed me to steal enough tip money. You keep bringing the beer to the table, and you charge them for about half of what you do. You get really good tips. So that's how I supported my drinking habit. And I was hanging around with people that, shouldn't have been hanging around with. This is before hippies. This part comes later. But the people I was living with, they were called beatniks. And, they had these little places where they go and play the bongo drums and sneak out back and smoke the funny cigarettes and stuff like that. Those were the kind of people I was hanging around with at that point. And I remember I was living with this guy. He was from Robeson County, and he had one of those Robeson County names that you think he's a Lumbee or something like that, but he looked Caucasian. He didn't look Lumbee. But he fancied himself as a shaman of the Neo-American Church, which is an Indian church. And so he sent off to, I forget whether it's Arizona or New Mexico, and he had them mail him a trunk, a footlocker full of peyote buttons. Well, unfortunately, the North Carolina General Assembly made peyote illegal about 2 weeks before that. And so I'm coming home from the delicatessen one afternoon, and the Chapel Hill police are kicking in the door of the apartment. And, you know, my lifestyle at that point, you could get all my worldly possessions in 2 garbage bags, you know. So I didn't even go to the apartment. I just walked off, left everything, which wasn't much, and moved over to the line into Durham County. I started living out in the country, out there with a drunk who had been in the Navy. And long story short, we did some things that attracted the attention of the sheriff's department. What was happening? We lived just inside of Orange County, and our drug dealer was about 200 feet away, just inside Durham County. And we had a party line. I know this is ancient history. Some of you younger folks probably don't know what a party line is. But in the old days, you didn't all have these phones you carry around in your pocket. There'd be 5, 6, 8 people on one telephone line, and you could pick up and listen to the other people talking, you know. But anyway, one day we couldn't. I was working for Duke at the time at the hospital. That is the most shameful part of my story, that I actually did work for Duke University. But you know, I don't go into that too much. Anyway. The telephone line didn't work, so I went down to his house and I looked in the door, and he's lying in the living room on the rug, and I could smell smoke. What happened was he was stoned or tripping or whatever. He set the sofa on fire and asphyxiated himself. So I, like the good citizen, I went over to a neighbor's and said, you know, call the sheriff. And they came in, and at that time I had hair down to about here and a beard down to about here. Of course, I was going bald up here anyway, you know, but I looked like a genuine hippie. Anyway, they called, well, we weren't called hippies yet, but, you know, they called the cops. The cops came, they took one look at me, and they went to get another warrant to search our house. But we were in a different county. So by the time they figured that out, I'd had a chance to go in and kind of clean up the house a little bit. But my roommate, who was a drunk, had gotten back from Vietnam the year before, and he had brought back an AK-47. And so when they searched the house, they found the AK-47, which is a Chinese communist assault rifle that you're not supposed to be carrying around. And so they were going to arrest me for federal, because the roommate wasn't there and he wasn't about to come back. So they were going to arrest me for federal firearms charges. And so I said, hey, go right ahead. For some reason, I never laid hands on it. He wanted me to, you know, show him how the AK worked and disassemble it. I never touched the thing. I had no fingerprints on it. So I said, you know, I don't know anything about it. I had no prints on it. You know, so they finally eventually dropped the case after charging me, because they couldn't prove that I knew about it. Anyway, the bottom line was, you know, things were going from bad to worse. And I got a letter from Lyndon Johnson wanting me to come work for him. And so I had to come. I was registered with the Moore County Draft Board and living up there, so I had to come down to Moore County to get on a bus to go to Raleigh. And there were about 55 of us. And I'd been in a little trouble, not a lot of trouble, but I kind of embroidered it to a great deal when I went in to talk to them at the induction center. Kind of made it out like that I was just a real criminal type. And I really wasn't. But the first time I went for my draft examination, they rejected me. And I remember, I wish I still had the paperwork, because I would have had it framed and up on the wall. I was rejected on grounds of moral turpitude. And hey, this is fine with me. You know, I am completely okay to be moral turpitude. And so I got sent home, and they put me in charge of the bus tickets on all the other guys they were rejecting. And there were like 5 of us, and 3 of them ended up in prison for murder. I don't know what happened to the other guy, and me. And so long story short, shortly after that, things are getting a little worse in Vietnam, and they decide that I'm maybe not too bad after all, and they're going to draft me again. So I decided, I didn't want to really shoot any of them little yellow fellows, and so I decided I'd enlist in the medics. It's amazing how little decisions like that affect your life, because I basically ended up doing that the rest from that day to this. Anyway, I was going to enlist in the medics, and I went down to Fort Sam Houston, and by the time I'm through AIT, I finally figured out that being in the medics and wanting to survive the war were not compatible with each other. So I was really, really worried, because they cut orders for me for the 173rd Airborne. And I ain't never jumped out of no airplanes, and I have no plans to jump out of any airplanes. But I was going to Vietnam as a leg medic with the 173rd Airborne. And, this is just another example of the things that I've gotten out of my life, just absolute miracles. They called me into the company commander's office, and they were looking for people to fill slots for wardmaster school. And my grades were high enough, and they said, do you want us to cancel these orders to go to Vietnam as a leg medic with the 173rd Airborne so you can go to wardmaster school at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Private Morton? That was not a real hard decision to make. So my orders to Vietnam got canceled. I ended up coming to Fort Bragg. I graduated from wardmaster school, and I ended up getting sent down to Georgia. I was at Hunter Field in Georgia, and we got levied for 904 men. 900 went to Vietnam, 2 went to Germany, 1 went to Korea, and I went to NATO headquarters, Brussels, Belgium. De Gaulle had just kicked us out of France, and they were moving NATO to Brussels. I was the NCOIC of NATO dispensary in Brussels, which was in an old Belgian eye hospital. My best buddy in the Army had been raised in Paris. He lived in Paris till he was 14, and when his folks got a divorce and he moved back to the States, his dad was the Merrill Lynch man in Paris. His uncle owned the Blue Note Jazz Cafe. Okay, so he had a lot more than sergeant's pay in his pocket. And he had all the connections. So every weekend, he and I were either in Paris doing what you do in Paris, which in our case was mainly trying to find the better grades of hashish, or we were in Amsterdam doing what you do in Amsterdam, which I will not go into because there's too many ladies here. So that was what happened to me, and how I ended up. And people say, people like AJ who were wading through rice paddies the whole time, they can't believe what happened to me, because out of 90 zillion guys going in the Army, 98% of which went to get their butts shot off in Vietnam, I'm either drinking Heinekens in Amsterdam or I'm smoking blonde Nepalese hash in Paris. Rough life. So, anyway, I got out of the Army when my time was up, and I came back, and all them people that were beatniks before I left were now hippies. And I started going to these rock festivals, and I started doing other things besides just the hashish and the marijuana and the Budweiser and stuff like that. They'd come up with these little pills called, Purple Haze and Morning Glory and this and that and all the others. And, well, I started doing plenty of that. And, I would have told you I wasn't an alcoholic. Of course, I was drinking a case of beer a day, but I was eating lots of acid and smoking lots of dope and all that kind of stuff, too. But, so I would have told you, if you suggested I had a drinking problem, I would have laughed at you. Anyway, the bottom line is I went back to work for Duke. Another tragedy in my life. And one day, I was eating acid like it was M&Ms. And I was living in a commune. I was doing all these hippie things. And one day I'm sitting on my porch, and I just eaten about 5 hits of acid, and my upper body disappeared. So about that time, I figured out I needed to quit doing that. And I quit doing that without a lot of problems, but I didn't quit drinking. And long story short, I needed to get out of Durham. I wasn't working for Duke anymore. I got fired. I was working in a party store in East Durham, and which was at the time it's the crack capital of North Carolina now. At that time, it was the heroin capital of North Carolina. And I'm working in the store one night, and a fellow comes in to make a withdrawal and shows me his pistol. And our security system was to stash the cash under the bags, the paper bags. And so he got a lot of money, and I got fired from that job. So I said, the hell with that, and I came back here to Moore County. And since the stuff I'd done in the Army had qualified me to take the LPN boards at the time. And so I took the LPN boards and went to work over here at the hospital. And the only opening they had was in the psychiatric unit. And I liked it. I seemed to have a talent for talking to crazy people. Okay? I enjoyed it a great deal. But the day came when they said, we need you to go up and work on detox. You know, we're gonna reassign you from the psychiatric unit to detox. And I said, no, you're not. You know, I ain't gonna work on detox. You know, I mean, most of those guys I've been drinking with, you know. So I refused to do that, and eventually they fired me. So that was about 1.5 years before I got sober. And in that 1.5 years, things went to hell in a handbasket. I had every bottom was worse than the bottom before. You know, I don't have time to go into all the details of all the bad things that happened, all the arrests I started having, and everything like that. But it was bad. And I remember, give an example. One of my last drinking jobs was working in the grounds crew over at the golf course. I got fired from that job. The morning I got fired from that job, they had a golf tournament. And you had to go down the fairways, and they'd give you a bucket of green sand to put in the divots from the day before so the cameras would not pick up the divots. The television cameras would not pick up the divots. My brain was too gone for me to be able to do that. You know, I tell people, one of my other jobs was laying side. I tell people, you know, the reason I got fired from the job is that, you know, I couldn't remember that the green side went up when I was laying side. It was almost that bad. Almost that bad. Anyway, so I'm making these sporadic attempts to stop drinking. I stopped drinking once for 19 days. I think there was another time in there where I actually made 30 days. I went to, the 30-day thing happened just before Stony Brook 81. And I decided, you know, that I was going to go to Stony Brook, and I was going to, you know, drink like a gentleman. I got me one of them little styrofoam beer coolers, and I put Miller High Life. I didn't like Miller. I figured I could, you know, I wouldn't be chugging it. And I climbed the fence and went to the Stony Brook races and walked around, had a good time, was there for hours. I still had beer left in the cooler. I ran into a guy that I knew. He had his tailgate down, and the races were over and things were breaking up, and he offered me a drink of George Dickel in a crystal glass with silver tongs putting the ice in it. What good alcoholic's going to turn that down? Good liquor in a crystal glass. So I took the drink. I wasn't drunk. He offered me a second one, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up a couple of days later in my house. Somebody had beaten the crap out of me. I have no memory of it. I don't know when it happened, who did it, anything like that. I woke up in my bed, with absolutely no memory of anything since that crystal goblet of George Dickel. And I woke up and there was blood all over my bed, blood all over my bedroom. I went out on the second floor. My bedroom was on the second floor. There was blood all up the stairs. I went in the bathroom. There was blood all over the bathroom. Looked in the mirror, saw where all the blood had come. You know, my head was just one big blood clot. And I promised Kirk I'd not leave this part out. You know, when I was living in that house, I used to regularly go into DTs. And one of the times was some of the things I experienced when I was going into DTs. I remember waking up in the middle of the night one time. My grandmother's descended from a Hessian deserter in the Revolutionary War. I don't know if there's any genetic connection to this, but one time I woke up in my bedroom and sat up, and there were Hessian soldiers running through the bedroom with them big, tall Hessian hats and the muskets. They were there. Okay? Another time I woke up in DTs, looked in my closet. I'm on the second floor. People are pulling into my closet like it's the pickup window at Hardee's and picking up their burger orders. Okay? Those things were real. You know, I saw them. You know, being in DTs didn't keep me from drinking. You know? You in DTs, the cure for that is drink some more. So, anyway, this thing at Stony Brook happened. Whatever happened after Stony Brook, whoever beat me up, I don't know. I went down the stairs and I sat on the couch, and I remember having thought, or I heard a voice actually, maybe I ought to go to AA. Pretty strange concept. But I had a little girlfriend at the time. She was as big a drunk as I was. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, but she was a real cute drunk too. Why? What she saw in me, I have never been able to figure that out. But she came over and she saw what kind of shape I was in. And since I'd been fired from the hospital, I wasn't about to go back to detox to check myself in. The only place in town I had any credit left was at Martin's Grill. Miss Beulah, I don't know if any of you had, Miss Beulah was the saint. And Miss Beulah gave me credit. And I got 2 6-packs of Budweiser from Miss Beulah. And I went home and detoxed myself. And then I showed up here, like I told you before. Okay? I haven't had a drink since I walked in the door. Now, I would like to be able to tell you why that happened, but I'm not really sure myself. Okay? I really haven't had a compulsion to drink since I walked in the door. And that has been over 31 years ago. Now, I got about 5 or 6 minutes to run through 32 years almost, okay? I had no problems with the first step. I obviously was completely powerless over alcohol. Now, I am not a religious person. I've never been a religious person. I've never affiliated myself with any faith community. If I were going to be anything, it would be a druid. I think running through the woods naked, painted with blue paint with mistletoe in your hair, that could be a religion I could belong to. You know? But, so you get up here and you start talking power greater than yourself. Whoa, baby. That's scary. How are you going to do that? Well, I remember my belly button birthday and my AA birthday exactly 6 months apart. And I remember sitting in this room and somebody reading those steps when I was 6 months sober. I was 6 months sober and 35 years old that day. And I remember the thought occurring to me that I have not had a drink in 6 months. And there has to be something external to me that has made that happen, because I could never stop drinking for any length of time myself. Ergo, I like to throw a little bit of Latin in, every once in a while. Let you know I've been to college. Ergo, there is a power greater than myself. Okay? So that is the second step. I took that. About 11 months sober, I was going, I'm trying to figure this out, man, because I don't want to get drunk. I'm trying to do what you people tell me to do. 11 months sober, I'm going to a spiritual retreat with a bunch of men, run by a Jesuit priest who I did not like at all. Okay? And I'm doing my usual arguments about why I can't do this or that. He takes me in the back room, opens up the big book to the third step prayer and says, Wayne, I want you to read the third step prayer. I read the third step prayer. He said, bingo, you have just done the third step. And, frankly, he was right. I turned my will and my life over to the care of whatever this thing is that's kept me sober so far. All right. I'd run through several sponsors. I had a lot of, my screening criteria for sponsors weren't very good. I won't go into reasons why I ran through them, but I finally found a guy that I could work with. And I'm about a year and a half sober, and he comes up terminally ill with throat cancer. So this is the only man that I've found to that point that I could trust. So I had to get off my ass and get to work. And I did my fourth step and went over to his house to give my fifth step to him. And when I sat down with him, all the work I'd done in my fourth step, I went out and got every fourth step guide you could buy. I should have bought stock in Hazleton, Anyway, the bottom line, I go in there and I sit down to read him this brilliant fourth step and do my fifth step. And it becomes very plain, very quickly, that my fourth step is nothing but fabricated BS. Ain't none of it's true. It's all what I wanted it to be. It's all a delusion and a fantasy for me to justify my behavior. It's had work, though, because I figured out that it was all BS. And so I sat down there and told him to the best of my ability on that date the truth. Which is quite an advancement. Okay? So I did my fourth and fifth step with him. He said, go home, take out the book, read the 6th and 7th step prayers. I did that. When I did that, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection with whatever. I can't go into theological concepts that I don't have, but I felt that I was in the presence of my higher power, and what was being communicated to me was, it's going to be okay. It didn't say, take up thy bed and walk, or come down with the mountain with the tablets, or any of that stuff. It simply was, it's going to be okay. Okay? And to the best of my ability, I've been working the steps. Flawed as though I may be. And I don't think I'd get a lot of argument about my flaws. Okay? From that day to this. Okay? I've left out a lot of anecdotes. And we're coming up with about 5 minutes left. So, the best I can say is, I hope you got something out of what I had to say tonight. And I was never as bad as Danny. Thank you.